back in Belgium, we had Brugge-De Panne, the women's race. We've got E3 tomorrow. It is pancake flat. The weather didn't look as diabolical as yesterday, but still cool, cold, bit windy. 164 k's from Brugge to De Panne. They're doing laps of De Muren over and over and over again with crosswind. We had here a very, very strong teams, unlike in the men's race where we were missing like the top classics riders. We had Balsamo here, we had Wiebes, Shari Besoit, Bastianelli, Pfeiffer Georgie with Yastrab and Charlotte Kuhl, Coponi. So really good teams here. Although SD Works only started with 5 riders, with Majura, Shackley and Uniken, but yeah, it was open again.
4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just want to correct your math skills there for a second. Anyway, so many crashes at the start, and a lot of teams continued with 4 riders as well after those crashes. Considering the likes of Bastianelli ended up in a ditch early on in a very big crash, which was across the peloton, loads of riders on the road. But this was before the broadcast properly started, and well, the race got neutralized during that because I'm guessing it's once again for the same reason where the road is so blocked with riders and with bikes everywhere that the ambulances can't pass to the peloton if another crash happens ahead. So if another second crash happens, then there's no medical support. So as a consequence, neutralization of the race continued a solid 5 to 10 minutes later. So nothing too crazy. Then crosswind started happening the second that they went into the mood. And then you notice every time, but there's a bit of a different thing here. I feel like there's a difference between the crosswinds we see in the Mooren here than in the men's race, where in the first 2 Mooren with the women's race, it's more that just everybody tries to go to the front and there's no collective action of just one team launching the echelon. Or was I blind?
No, although like Pfeiffer Georgie said they tried a bit earlier, even before the Muren to open it up. Which is interesting because they got Charlotte Kuhl here. That the race plan wasn't, which has been in the past, to ride like a closed off stage, bring Cole to a sprint, which is good to see because Pfeiffer Georgie's probably overall, she is overall a better classics rider than Charlotte Kuhl. So she wasn't just in the lead out domestique service for Charlotte Kuhl. But yeah, I was surprised, Benji, that SD Works were so active, but I guess if you can't beat them, join them. Like, it's kind of a UAE Tour Stage 1. Everyone knows it's going to kick off. You may as well be the team like Bahrain with Bilbao and co. Will just launch it, because if you're not and you're at the back of the rotation and someone else does, you could be caught behind a split.
Exactly, and it felt so obvious because before we got to that Demurin section, we saw SD Works basically spend the likes of Anna Shackley, which is the climber in this team, by the way, pacing on the section before the Demurin to keep Wiebes in the first 3 riders before the Demurin. So they just spend a lot of riders in positioning before the Demurin, and when it really mattered, there was not much support left around Wiebes when the real echelon started occurring. Now, there was an echelon that happened during those 74-kilometer Demuren the first time they went through there, but after a bit, the tempo started dying, to be honest, and another crash happens just after it, which is also, once again, another rider in a ditch, and it was an odd crash, because from the helicopter angle, Tita Noyen is the rider that went into the ditch, and she kind of like touched the wheel and then started heading sideways straight into the ditch, and looked pretty deep for a ditch as well, so pretty painful, but she jumped out and continued riding. Anyway, 7K later, second Demuren. And once again, crosswinds being pulled not just by one team, but but by the leaders of every team that want to stay ahead, except for Charlotte Cole, who wasn't really there at this point. And a group starts to be created, right? And it's a solid group, including good riders, right?
Good riders, multiple teammates from the strong teams. We had Julie de Wilde and Schweinberger, the Austrian champ, I think, from De Koenig. We had 2 Canyon SRAM with Besoit, who just won a race, and Michael van der Duin, Alice Barnes is strong. Lorena Wiebes, we all know who she is. Balsamo as well. So the two leaders from the two strongest teams in the peloton, Trek and SD Works, represented. But Emily Diedrichsen, who's gone back to X, the former world champion, I think in like 16, she was
Yeah.
quite good today. The two key riders here are Pfeiffer Georgie and Megan Yastrab. Now, Yastrab we sort of penciled or circled rather to have a better season this year. I think the young American, she's still like 20, I think. 21, just turned 21. And Pfeiffer Georgie probably, I mean, difficult to say on the basis of just opening weekend, but when Kopecky went, there was only one rider that got close to her on the Moor, and that was Pfeiffer Georgie. So she is a
Did
top classics rider.
I think you mentioned her for Roubaix this year as a potential winner in the preview of the DSM women, but
Really.
definitely a rider that is going to perform in that race, I'm pretty sure, because she was close last year, if I recall correctly. But you're
She's
right;
so good.
those are two key riders, and the key element as well is that there's dynamics between these teammates of teams because Schweinberger and De Wilde is the faster rider, Georgie and Jastrab's on paper the faster pure sprinter, even though Georgie has a solid sprint as well. And when we look at Bosside and Van der Duin, there it's a bit closer because Van der Duin has had solid sprints. Bosside has solid sprint as well in the past. So it was interesting what those teams were going to do because you'd expect the attacks later to come from these teams. And it took a while because at this point, 62K to go, the gap is 18 seconds, which is nothing. But then it started increasing 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. And you know it's going to be fought out in this group because the rest of the peloton is in the shadow realm.
Bad
Now,
news for Wiebes.
okay.
Like, well, if it's always 15 seconds, they can't start playing, right?
Yeah.
They can't start conserving. So, when we saw the UAE EDQ, one of the teams chasing, they'd missed the split and they're quite a strong team. They've got Bastianelli. But then when you see one of their riders in the middle trying to bridge the 30-second gap, you know the race is completely done. So, I believe that's called a potato chase where Benji is from.
Chasse
And
patate.
so that's the signal for the race being Le Fini for Group 2. And as I said, like, I was kind of surprised Wiebes was working so willingly, to be honest, because,
Yeah.
like, it's not the worst situation. You start the race with 4 riders, you're not exactly going to be able to control the final 40 kilometers with 4 riders with 1 leader very easily. So I'm not going to say just have your team come back, but it's also not great to DSM in the group with you. Like, I just thought trouble was brewing for Wiebes and Balsamo because they're too quick. There's no we might beat them in the finish with Yastrab. No. You will lose. So you have to be aggressive and open it up. And it was just a question of when. And I think it didn't. What kind of happened was DSM tried to resplit it in the last Muren section, right?
Yeah. Just when they passed the traffic plate on the right that said the Muren is starting here, we see those two DSM riders moving up on the left side of the road, kind of surprising half the group, to be honest, with the speed that they came by. Was Georgie with Jastrap in the wheel that was at the front of the group, and they hammered that pace and immediately split the group in half, basically. And the riders that were still there at the front were the likes of Wiebes, were the likes of Balsamo, and if I recall correctly, I think also Shadi Bosside was still in that group and Diederiksen. So
She
that's
was,
the group
yeah.
we have left. But while it's splitting, we've got a bit of a gap on the likes of Alice Barnes and Julie De Wilde, who are very close on the wheel still. But then Barnes seems to like go to the right of the road and slightly moves left and hits the back wheel by a tiny bit of the rider in front of her, goes down, hits her head really hard. Julie De Wilde goes over her, hits her head really hard as well. Immediately thought, okay, these riders need a concussion check, 100%. And I will say now, what is it with cameras staying on injured riders so much this last week? We saw it with the likes of Cataldo so much, where they stayed looking at him so much. And then with the crash of Kenny Elissonde, I think the stage after in Catalonia, same thing. And now in this crash, we basically had a view of them doing
They
a
doubled
concussion
back
check.
to her.
Yeah,
Like 10 minutes later, they double back. I was like, come on, man. It's I don't know. Like you have to show the crash. You have to show the replay of the crash. You have to show an alternate angle of the crash. We need to know that for why the crash occurred. Totally get it. But yeah,
yeah,
you don't need to linger on the riders lying on the ground. 100% agree. And after that, Murin is where we see first the games begin. As they enter sort of a town area, Yastrab goes initially, which is the correct thing to do because she's not going to be the Georgie stronger in this sort of move. This is with like 7-8 Ks to go. She's closed down, I think, by Balsamo, and maybe
yeah.
even Bosoit was helping as well. She was a little bit too active helping. Wiebes not helping. And we know Yastrab moves to the left, Georgie's menacingly at the back. The others fan out to the right, and this is the same way Volgren attacked in Omloop 2018. It's the same way Benoit attacked in Kerner. You attack on the gutter side of your teammate, and they can then block off your wheel a bit, and the others can't react as quickly. And there was a divider in the road just afterwards. It was like the perfectly timed attack. So Wiebes and Balsamo couldn't swing from the right,
Yep.
sprint directly onto Georgie's wheel. That creates the initial separation which she needs to turn it not from a sprint anymore, but into a 30-second effort, which is a different kettle of fish for the sprinters.
And it reminds me completely towards the attack that Asgreen did in E3 in 2021, I think, where he also went on the other side of the divider and people needed to respond immediately to close the gap. And because the gap's already there, the doubt is starting to kick in with everybody else of like, if I close this now, I've got my sprint done. I can't spend my energy here. Otherwise, I'm losing the sprint afterwards. And the value here is that because of that action they did on the final Muren, Jesus, I can't even speak Flemish anymore. Because they had that move, there's only one team with two riders in that group, which was DSM. So there's no teammates for all these other riders. So a Balsamo looks at others. She tries chasing a tiny bit. A Wiebes looks at others. She tries chasing a tiny bit. Bassout tries chasing a tiny bit. But we all know it's gone, right? We all know she's gone. And from Didrikson, it won't come because you know that UNOX will go for the UCI points at all costs and will never sprint towards a wheel to risk losing more UCI points at the finish line. And we saw that from that point onwards because Amalie Didrikson didn't take a single turn from that point the entire rest of the race in that group and sat in last wheel preparing for the sprint for second.
And what was curious, when we saw that Wiebes wasn't immediately taking over, that's a death knell for the group. Because if
Yep.
Besoit is pulling, Balsamo's pulling, and she tried her best Balsamo, but Wiebes isn't pulling, there is just absolutely no way that you are going to keep pulling with her and your wheel. And I thought, is she letting Balsamo keep this gap at 6 seconds and then she's going to try and snap close it? The answer was no, as in she did try some sort of move, but it really didn't go anywhere. And I don't even think Wiebes, I think she was a little bit tired actually. And Georgie was incredibly strong. And as that gap, yeah, once you have it out to, you've been out there alone for a minute, 2 minutes, you just become more and more likely that you're going to win the stage because no one's going to want to chase behind. Perfect tactics from her, perfect tactics from DSM, and not GCN. I don't think they have a pro cycling team. And they deserve the win today. And that's actually
Yeah.
her first World Tour win and really first, like she won British National Champs and she won a 1.2, but it's her first like pro win. So that also surprised me, winning ahead of Balsamo, who beat Wiebes in the sprint a minute 10 behind. Yastrab in fourth, Besoit fifth. Dietrichson, despite sitting on, still came sixth because she led out the sprint. Mike van der Duen beat Schweinberger for eighth, and then Consoni won the bunch sprint ahead of Sanguinetti behind. I think this is another playbook to beat Wiebes, right? The problem is, in other races, there'll be Kopecky in this group.
Yeah. Exactly. And maybe even other riders. So this is a scenario that likely won't happen on the biggest step of races. In Gent Wevelgem, we're likely going to have a larger group as well. Depends on the echelons in the Moeren early on. Before we get to the hills, I'm not. Do the women's circuit do the Moeren as well? in women's race of Gent-Wevelgem? I actually don't know. I have to take a look at the parcours. That being said, Wiebes is clearly more versatile than last year, right? She was already strong in like Ronde van Drenthe 2021. She was really versatile with the rest of the team there, where they have like 4 riders in the first 10 riders in a group, and then it went to a sprint and so forth. But I feel like we didn't see that too much across last season as much as we saw it this year so far. And I do think Wiebes is in position number 1 to win Gent-Wevelgem now.
Yeah, I think so. Like, it's so far from the finish, the last climb, and unless there's savage crosswinds like there were in 21, it still came back then, and Vos won from the sprint when Trek went too early. So, yeah, number one favourite, unless Kopecky has other ideas, which we don't know, could always be possible. But, yeah, a really nice win for Pfeiffer Georgie. She is 22. She's signed through 25 at DSM. They obviously believe in her. She's now come in the top 10 of all three. No, sorry, that's not true. She didn't have Drenthe, but she fifth in Omelette, ninth in Strade, first in Brugge-De Panne. Cannot wait to see how she goes at the other one-day races she'll be targeting this season. Otherwise, around the traps, we had Settimana Internazionale, Coppi e Bartoli. Ben Healy won a group sprint, not a group sprint, a small sprint from a group of Pozzovivo and Padun, his teammate, on a hilly course. I think Padun gave him a lead out, but there's also no television coverage of this. But Ben Healy's a nice rider. 22, showed some things last year, 11-year stage winner. He's just I don't know, it looks like a future GT breakaway winner to me. And that's also what EF Education Easy Post like from their riders. In terms of GC, he is nowhere near. Calzone was in the break though. Initially, he was
Hold the
looking good.
Pisa. Pretty good.
Yeah, he's second on GC, 8 seconds behind Mara Schmidt now. So they're in a group behind with Engelhardt and Schmidt, Varda, Leo Hayter, etc. So tomorrow we have another hilly stage. All these stages look kind of similar. This is a bit more punchy. It's a 11% 800-meter climb with about 9Ks to go. What will be interesting to see, I think Globe DNF today, whether, how Leo Hayter goes, how Schmidt goes. It should suit Schmidt, actually. Sean Quinn won yesterday, as we said. But yeah, just something to monitor. That's a good testing ground for the young guys, that race. Any other news, Benji?
Not really, right? When it comes to cycling, we had the races that we mentioned so far were ones that we wrote. The Olympias Tour is happening in the Netherlands, but if we're gonna start mentioning that, we can also talk about the Volta a Alentejo in
Our
Portugal.
producer Luke would like us to mention the
To
Olympias.
wrap it up,
Luke, do you have anything to say about the Olympias tour? Given I know you watched it.
enter crickets.
Typical Dutch race, right?
No television coverage?
No, but echelons,
Echelons.
big caps,
All
reduced
right.
groups.
Dutch group's the hardest. Dutch racing's the hardest racing. That's what I'm hearing.
Maybe, yeah.
All right. E3 Saxo Bank Classic is tomorrow. Of course, the races which are on a weekday, if they're a one-day race, should not be World Tour status. That doesn't mean this doesn't have a good start list, though. How this differs from the Tour of Flanders to my uncivilized Australian eyes, I don't know. It just looks like a lot of climbs. It's 205 Ks. It's 1 hour less. What is this race? I like it. I'm going to enjoy it. But what is it?
The enjoyable part about A3 for me is that it's the kind of race where the parcours has multiple acts. We know that there's an act before the climb start. That's a normal one where they control the breakaway and so forth. But then the hills start, and then there's like a resting period. And that resting period will likely only be a certain amount of riders that will already be top riders, because there's likely going to be action on the earlier climbs already, because last year and the year before we saw the action pop off on the time bed already. So there's a possibility that once again the race opens up at 82 kilometers, and that we then see a resting period afterwards where there's like a group ahead in the same way that it was for the last 2 years. So that's a differentiator with RVV, where that can also happen, but you still have the combination of Oude Kwaremond and Paterberg 17 times next to that in Ronde van Vlaanderen. So, yeah.
Is this race parkour better than the Tour of Flanders? Kind of think it is.
Well,
They
get the
do.
fuck out of here.
Why they do? Quarter Krocheterberg, which is 1200 meters, 7.3%. They do that 100 k's out, and then it's just a succession. That's a hard climb, and then they have a succession of Kortekier, Tyenberg. Not too much flat. Like Flanders, kind of before second Clermont, bit mid. From
You
like 80
don't
k's to
rate the
55
Molenberg?
k's to go. What do they got? But in that zone, it's like
You don't rate the Molenberg.
I'd have to look. This looks, yeah. Anyway, start list: Pogacar, Alaphilippe Asgreen, Van der Poel, Søren Kragh, Van Aert, Laporte, Benoit, the Jumbo-Visma Super Team, Van Avermaet, Kosnefra, Bini is back, Moritz, right. It's as good a start list as you could ever want for a World Tour one-day race. So, despite my bitching and moaning, I cannot wait to watch it. Ganna also going. I wonder if he does well, whether he'll be shoehorned into Ineos RVV squad. That's something to watch out for, as well as Joshua Tarling, their neo-pro, who is making his, starting there. I'll be keen to see how he goes. I presume he'll be on early duties. Ben Turner also coming back from injury. I saw him at the start of stage 1 on the bike. So, I mean, that anecdote means nothing, but he's riding here, so low pressure, but keen to see his shape after his unfortunate crash. So who you got, Benji? This is the race where Jumbo-Visma blow everyone out of the park. MVP and Pog kind of look underdone, and it means nothing for Flanders.
Oh, I think this one might actually mean something for Flanders.
Really?
Yeah, I genuinely believe this means something for Flanders, just because this is the first time we will see this year where a strong Jumbo-Visma team tries to beat the likes of a relatively stacked, as in just Pogacar plus Wellens at UAE, and also next to that, Alpecin at their full force for the cobbles as well. So it's the first time that we have all the best riders at their teams here. So I think this will give an indicator of what the level is of these riders towards the Ronde van Vlaanderen, and also next to that, how well they work together. Like, will Wellens be able to launch the likes of a Pogacar on a climb, or will he already be blown out of the water if Jumbo strikes early on, for example, on the time back like they did last year? So what will happen as a consequence for all these teams? I think this will actually be a pretty damn good race, and I think it will already give a short telling towards the Ronde van Vlaanderen. But RVV is longer, more kilometers, more climbs towards the end, so can still be decided later on.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's a little bit more representative than Dwars D'Or next week, because this
more
is
than last year.
Particularly more than last year. And also Pogacar, I think, got caught up in a crash, and then he had to chase and Dwars D'Or, and kind of ruined his race. But yeah, the starless Kung, Jorgensen, Sturven, Pedersen, like unbelievably good. Who have you got for it?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, I found it very difficult to predict this one, because on one end you could think, Jumbo might once again send the likes of a Van Baarle forward in the same way they did at Omloop. And if you look at the rest of their team, they've got plenty of riders that do that. The only thing that I do want to talk about quickly before we end it off is, what if, for example, Jumbo knows that Van Aert is their looked at rider in their team, knows that Van der Poel will mark everything Van Aert does, knows that Pogacar will mark everything that Van Aert does. But who will mark the likes of Van Baarle and Laporte or Benoit early? And that's when a certain Kragh Andersen, a Hermans, and a Wellens will be sent. But if I'm Jumbo-Visma, I'm happy with Laporte being with those riders.
You ain't not going to send Wellens. No way.
Don't
you think they'll reserve him for the lead out?
Slovenia sent Trotnik with Remco Evenepoel.
When?
In the World Championships.
Yeah, but Pog didn't have it. And that was Slovenia. I don't know. Yeah. Don't you think Wellens... don't you reckon he's going to be reserved for the leader? I agree with you. It's a natural thing to do. Mm-hmm. I think Søren Kragh's more likely. But like when you look at those Flanders behind Søren Kragh's a nice rider, but when you look at the Flanders behind the scenes documentaries and the Rudolph brothers, they're like literally you have one job to everybody is to make Matthew Van Der Poel win. So I don't know. Like, it was great. He was up there in the Poggio, but he also got dropped. Like, you can put him in the group with Dylan Van Baarle. I'm taking Dylan Van Baarle over Søren Kragh Andersen.
Over.
Dylan
Yeah.
Van Baarle. Yeah.
Me too.
What you said earlier. So
that's what I'm trying to say.
That's not a risk I think
Like,
they're willing
if
to
these
take. Do you think they'll
teams
take
like
that risk?
Alpecin and- that I think UAE will take that risk.
I mean, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
Because if you don't put them there, then
Good
you
luck
chase.
chasing.
And so you burn them anyway.
And it's not only that you burn them anyway, but in what way will you chase? Because will you just base with your team at the front, Trentin and Wellens? Like, I think they did that at some
Nah,
point
they'll
in
do a lead
RVP
out.
last year. They got to launch Pogacar then.
They'll try to launch Pog across, yeah. But then he does that to Dylan. Okay, great. Now you got
Wout in
4
the wheel.
Jumbo Visma. And you got no teammates. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait to watch. These are all the questions that, I love this stuff. I can't wait to watch, even though, it should be a good one. I just don't know why it's on a Friday. Like, I guess to give space to Gent Wevelgem, but yeah. Anyway, I'm really keen to see how Quickstep go with Alaphilippe and Asgreen. They are the big question marks. Of course, Remco's doing well in Catalonia, but there is, waar is Quickstep in the Voorjaar is in all the Flemish papers for Benji's reference. That's where is Quickstep in spring. That's Dutch. I speak it. Actually, funny story. I was at here we go. So Jumbo's hotel somehow is a Dutch hotel. Maybe because so many Dutch people. I was like, are you kidding? So I get there, go to the front desk, and I speak to them in Spanish, and they look at me like when Spanish people speak to me. I was like, what's going on here? And then they heard Jumbo Visma. They go back, come back, and then they're like, oh yeah, and they start speaking to me in Dutch. And I was like, are they podcast listeners? Like, don't they know? Like, it's a bit. I don't actually speak Dutch. It's just a bit, but I do, but I don't. And that was terrifying. Especially because that's not true. I understand Flemish. I don't speak Dutch. Just to clarify.
Yeah.
I understand West Vlaams. Anyway, let us know who you think will win E3 tomorrow. How will it change Flanders? We can't wait to watch, and we'll have the recap of the Catalonia Remco Fest and the big race tomorrow. Until then, ciao.